What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Always Hope podcast, a production of Will Wood's Faith and Marriage. This is Dr. Mario Sacasa, and I pray that this episode finds you doing very well today. In today's episode, I welcome back Danny Fitzpatrick to discuss his new book released by Sophia Institute Press titled Restoring the Lord's Day, How Reclaiming Sunday Can Revive Our Human Nature. In today's episode, we discuss the importance of the Sabbath, how it is crucial for restoring our human nature, and how culture has shifted away from recognizing its significance. We also discuss at length about the surprising ways that Acedia, or slothfulness, manifests in our lives, and how it leads to a sadness about divine goods. And we end today's discussion by offering practical ways of reclaiming the Sabbath in your life and with your family. This episode really is a call to integrate these principles that we're speaking about into our daily lives while emphasizing the transformative power of dedicating time to God, especially on Sundays. Well, if you have any thoughts about today's episode, please join the conversation on Instagram or leave a rating or write a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Every single one of those are truly helpful, and I'm very grateful for all of you who have left some comments. Well, let's get into this conversation with Danny Fitzpatrick. Danny Fitzpatrick, welcome back to the Always Hope podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Mario. Thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, man, I'm just delighted to have this conversation. When we had you on last time, we talked about the journal and the good work of SL9 and what you guys are doing there in terms of trying to bring beauty back into this conversation with liturgical art and churches. But today we're talking about your new book that you have that is recently being released by Sophia Institute. It is Restoring the Lord's Day, How Reclaiming Sunday Can Revive Our Human Nature. So let's kind of jump into this, all right? Restoring the Lord's Day, How Reclaiming Sunday Can Revive Our Human Nature. Why? Why is Sunday? Why is Sabbath? What is it about that is going to restore our human nature? I thought Sundays were just closed because, Chick-fil-A said so. Like what's going on here? What is going on with Sundays that we need to reassess as a culture?
Right. There's no Chick-fil-A, no Hobby Lobby. Might as well stay home.
Might as well stay home.
What are you going to do?
There's nothing else to do. Exactly.
It's a wonderful question. And I think maybe I could start to answer it by talking about my experience of Sunday as, really as a child, but then kind of throughout life. But when I was a kid, maybe starting around third grade and on, I often felt very sad on Sundays. And so later, it wasn't until later that I started to kind of question why. Like, why is that? I just, Sunday morning, I just wake up, I feel sort of melancholy. I'm just sort of stressed about, I've got to do this homework. I've got, the school week coming up. I don't really want to go to mass, And so why, there's this day I hear people call it the Lord's Day, the Sabbath, the day of rest. And it doesn't feel like that to me. It feels like a day of stress, anxiety, just a day of melancholy. But of course, that's not at all what it's meant to be, right? It's meant to be through the liturgy, through the remembrance of the resurrection. It's meant to be a moment that kind of attunes all the rest of our moments to eternity. It's meant to be the sort of touchstone that we come back to in the cycle of each week and let ourselves be restored, let ourselves be aware of the joy of the resurrection, and then in turn transform the rest of life around that. So I think you and I are probably going to focus, like you said, mostly on the early parts of the book. But one of the things I mentioned in the last chapter of the book, where I draw a lot on Pope John Paul II's Dies Domini, is he quotes this line from Origen there, that the true Christian is the one who lives always in the Lord's Day, that to be transformed in Christ is ultimately to be someone who's living always in the resurrection. And so I think, it's very obvious just looking at my experience as a child, what I was feeling and what I think many people feel on Sundays is not this joy of the resurrection. It's rather this anxiety about the everydayness that we're so often steeped in. But yeah, it's this moment when God reaches in, right, and wants to make us new.
Thanks for sharing that about your childhood, and I think many of us, even as adults, can relate to that. That Sunday tends to be the day where we're trying to get done the things that we couldn't get done every other day,
Right.
and so it's like, well, I'm cramming it in. And then you say this in the book also, and I experienced this, like the night, it's like, all right, what's the week going to look like? Let me just kind of look at my schedule. Who am I seeing? What are the appointments that I have coming up? How can I kind of get a game plan for that? And that's all fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the image that you talk about with Sunday being almost this stress and anxiety because it's in anticipation of what the week's going to be. The thought that I'm having right now is it's almost like what I felt like as a kid on August 1st. It's like, oh, the new school year is about to come. It's like the summer is over and the dread of whatever the new school year is going to be is kind of emerging,
Right.
And so kind of a similar sentiment that, again, is part of our lived experience, and it's fine. But what you're articulating is that if we only see Sunday in that vein of anticipation of the stress of the week's going to come, or as kind of a final day to wrap everything up that we couldn't quite get done, then we're missing the boat. Then there's something missing to that, because we need to have that day, that seventh day, that Sabbath day, where we are worshiping and when we are being reminded of the resurrection.
Right.
I heard somebody say this, and you're a theologian, so please let me know if this is right or wrong, that the reason that the number 666 is attributed to Satan and to hell is that it's eternal 6 days. You don't get to the seventh day. Like you don't get to the Sabbath day. It's simply just that. It's just this eternal state of work and stress and turmoil and strife that you never actually get to the seventh day. And I think that's kind of where we're at in our culture, is that, you mentioned this in the book, that we've lost any sense of liturgy. You obviously in New Orleans, I was in New Orleans for 10 years. And so I understand that the culture has this rhythm to it. There are seasons for things. You get snowballs in the summer. You watch Saints football in the fall. You have king cake during Mardi Gras season, and in springtime is when all the crawfish boils happen. I mean, like you don't get king cakes in the fall. That's an abomination. The snowball stands are closed in the winter anyway, so there's nothing you can do about that. But there is this kind of liturgy to the culture that exists that is unique to New Orleans culture. That is something that doesn't really exist in American culture as a whole. And what we're finding in American culture as a whole is that everything is just on all the time, and we're doing things all the time, and there's no rhythm anymore that's happening in our lives. And so in some ways we are kind of living this 666, not to be like this demonic, okay, I'm not getting that, but just in terms of the symbolism that's being generated there, like it feels like we're kind of in that space.
Yes. So I just started in one of my junior classes, one of my favorite novels, A River Runs Through It by Norman Maclean. And there's the wonderful passages where the father tells his sons that, beneath the river are the rocks, with the rain from the beginning of time on it, and beneath the rocks are the words. And part of our task is to learn to listen to the words beneath all things, and that it's only by rediscovering God's rhythms that man can regain beauty and power. So kind of, as you say, one of the other sides of my youth, where I really felt some of that rhythm, is kind of, as you say, being in New Orleans, which is a place that is very rhythmic. I remember one of the most bleak days of the early part of my life was my first Mardi Gras as an undergraduate at the University of Dallas, which was the first Mardi Gras, or indeed any day of Mardi Gras week, that I had ever done any sort of work, any sort of normal activity. And I felt so sad that day, just going to class and going to the cafeteria and just treating it like any other day. But that was also my experience so for several years, after I worked here at Jesuit the first time, I worked in the car business as a salesman and a manager. And that's when I really felt the just sort of endless grind of work. Because yeah, it was just, I usually worked 6 days a week, for something like 10 to 14 hours a day. And so by the time Sunday came around, if we were off, which we usually were, but by the time it got there, I was just so drained and so behind on taking care of anything at home that, yeah, it just felt like, yeah, that 666, that sort of endless repetition, um, this kind of anti-eternity that just feels so dead and dull. So yeah, finding those rhythms and seeing that in New Orleans, having things like crawfish season and Mardi Gras, these sorts of things, which even if they're very often secular, kind of hedonistic in some way, still I think that was an education in the way that God wants time to be, the way that time is meant not just to be this sort of fake, miserable facsimile of eternity, but is instead meant to kind of, at various moments, raise our attention to the eternal so that we can kind of ultimately, with Christ, lift up time to the Father.
Which is what the Mass is,
Yes.
in par excellence
Yes.
of the liturgy. I have to go back to this real quick, to the river runs through it quote, because I just need to let the audience know that this is how you write. I mean, you're pulling from Aquinas and Pope Benedict and John Paul II and Cassian and Evagrius, but then you're also pulling in all these great American authors, Evelyn Waugh, Walker Percy. I mean, there's just it's there. They're all there. There's this cast of characters that are all there, in the book, and so I appreciate you just kind of bringing that into our interview as well. That the second thought that I'm having right now is this: we think that this overworking is, well, okay. Before I get there, okay. Second thing I want to say is since leaving New Orleans, I feel like I've become a Mardi Gras apologist, where like I'm having to explain to people in Charlotte, in the area, like what the significance of it is. And I was in New Orleans in January, and when I flew home, I got a king cake from Zupardo's, and I brought it home. So I brought it on the flight with me. And as I'm walking through the Charlotte airport, everybody's like, "What is that? What are you doing? Why are you bringing? What's the significance of that? Why are you bringing that home?" And I was like, "If I have to explain it, you're not going to understand. Like, it's just
Right.
I can try my hardest to explain why this is, but it's not going to make sense." And so much so, my wife, she's learned how to make king cakes, and we went to a Super Bowl party that would happen to fall, kind of a few weeks before Mardi Gras, and she made a king cake and brought it to the Super Bowl party, and it was not touched. Like, nobody at the party touched it because nobody knew what it was. Nobody had any context for it. So it was like, what is that? I don't get it. And I was by like halftime, I was like, I hope nobody eats it because I don't want to throw the pearl in front of the swine. It's like,
Yes.
like if you don't get it, you don't get it. But just trying to explain to people that Mardi Gras isn't just what we see, what we think about, like, girls and the beads. It's there, of course. You go down to the quarter, all of that's present there. But it primarily is this cultural event that very few cities have. Very few cities have this kind of tent pole event that unifies the entire community, from the wealthiest to the poorest, from the single to the family. And it really is this event that is really spectacular. And so I didn't get that when I first moved to New Orleans. I remember taking my job for the Archdiocese the first time, and I saw the list of days that we had off, and I saw that we had Lundi Gras, which is the Monday before, and Mardi Gras off, and I was like, "Are you joking? Like, we really get 2 days off, And the HR person was like, "Honey, you can't even get to the office even if you wanted to because the streets are going to be closed." And I was like, "Okay, we'll see what this is." And then it was my first Mardi Gras. I was like, "Okay, I get it. Like, I get it. I get it. I see what's happening here." So anyways, I just want to go ahead.
No, yeah, it's a really wonderful thing. And I was talking to a colleague about this recently. He's from New England, but has lived down here for many years. Also spends a significant amount of time out in Cajun country, like around New Iberia. And he was talking about how we were basically kind of comparing the cultural Catholicism of each region of Louisiana. And he and I agreed that as far as maybe lived daily activity goes, Cajun country is maybe a little stronger in terms of its Catholicism, but in terms of the structuring of society as a whole, there's a way in which that Mardi Gras event remains something that I think sets New Orleans apart from almost anywhere else. As far as, here's something where, like you said, it's not just the Catholics, it's not just the rich, it's not just any group of people, but really the whole city is transformed by this fundamentally Catholic event, this marking out of time, ultimately according to the rhythm of the church. And so there's something just really astonishing about that, and it's such an example of good waste, right? The kind of how really good it is to sometimes just take a break and just kind of expend your substance on celebration. Since and the Mass in its way is the pinnacle of doing this, right? Of taking ourselves and just lavishing ourselves on God. But yeah, to give up that day of work, to give up that day of profit, and just say, here in this moment, we're going to anticipate somehow the joy of heaven.
And when we lose that, we lose the hierarchy of things. Mm-hmm. And that's why what you're saying is that Sunday isn't, again, just about getting another thing done or getting in preparation, but it's this touch point. Mass is this touch point where our imagination, our hearts, our consciences, our prayer, our life is reconnecting with that which is the greatest good. And if we lose that, we lose a lot. And that's just a different way of thinking about the liturgy. It's so often we just look at it as something boring, or the priest doesn't give a good homily, or all those things. And I recognize those are elements, the music, those are all elements that help our ability to enter into or to participate into, the mysteries that are present. But those mysteries are present regardless of what the style is, that one has a preference for. So let's go back to slothfulness, if we can.
Yes.
Why is this overworking? We think that this overworking is diligence. We think that it is efficiency. We think that it is, virtue, but it's not. Mm-hmm. Why do we have it backwards?
Yes, so maybe to give a little bit of context. So I started thinking about this problem when I was a senior at the University of Dallas, and I was writing my thesis in philosophy. And I wrote about some similarities and differences between Acedia or sloth and the dark night of the soul, which curious, what struck me was that they both can produce similar sorts of feelings in the soul, namely this kind of feeling of the absence of God in some way. But acedia or sloth ultimately is this sadness about the good things that God wills for us. And so it tends to manifest or it can at least manifest in a very intense busyness. So you mentioned earlier, there's a fundamental hierarchy to things, and some things are more important than others. But one of the marks of sloth is that it tends to send us toward the less important things, to distract us from the things that God really wants us to focus on. So, kind of a classic example is, if I'm a student, let's say I have a big essay due, at the end of the week. And so all week, right, I might tell myself things like, well, I really need to clean up my room before I can start on this. And I really need to do my laundry. And I have these other little assignments that it would be really great if I got those out of the way first. And I haven't done a deep clean of the kitchen in a while, so probably good to do that. And then the bathrooms. I haven't been exercising much lately, so I should probably do that. And so we sort of spiral into these like constant little errands, right?
Yeah.
Let me make
I'm sure
myself
nobody
as busy
knows
as
what
possible.
you're talking about. I'm
Right.
sure nobody can relate to
No.
what you're talking about, right,
No,
Danny?
impossible. So there's that sort of side of it, which I think as a culture we've kind of embraced on this real macro level of like what's really important is to be always doing something productive, especially. I mean, we'll probably talk about this a little later, but especially monetarily productive. And so, Lord's Day celebration in any authentic sense is really contrary to that, right? The sense of, yeah, let me actually put God first. I'm going to forgo a day's profits. I'm going to forgo a day's productive labors, and instead just waste this day on God. Sloth hates that. So one of the things that really struck me as I was researching Acedia was that Aquinas says specifically that Acedia is a sin against the commandment to honor the Sabbath, which seems very strange because, again, kind of as you've alluded to, we think of sloth as just this kind of laziness. I'm not really doing anything. And so it seems like, well, Sunday is just this day to kind of laze around, right? So how could sloth be contrary to that? But really, like we're kind of misunderstanding both things, right? We're misunderstanding the Lord's Day as, we think of it, just a day of rest. Whereas real rest is attending to the Lord, right? Which kind of, as Aristotle says, is the most difficult thing that we can do. And something that maybe we only attain to for brief moments in a long life. And we tend to think of sloth as just laziness, which again, it's not quite how Aquinas or the other greats of the spiritual tradition would understand it. Right? It can be this sort of laziness, this malaise, this disinclination to do anything, but primarily that disinclination arises from feeling some kind of sadness about what God wants of me. And what he wants of me on Sunday is to worship him.
And worship him on Sunday, but then make our lives an act of worship for him.
Yes.
In response to that. And again, that doesn't mean that we're not productive. There's time and space for us to do the things that we need to do.
Of course.
But there also needs to be that level of focus instead that we're attending to the right things in the right order. And the image that you use is beautiful. I mean, when I was doing my dissertation for my doctorate, one of my professors would say that, doctoral students are notorious for having very clean apartments. Because everybody's putting off sitting down and writing their dissertation and can make excuses to do all this other stuff. And what a great analogy for the spiritual life, that we can ignore the thing that requires the most or the heaviest lifting, one would say, or the heaviest attention, and we can ignore that and put ourselves in a space where all these other little things are good, and they're all goods, of course. They're, we need to work, we need to make money, we need to provide for a family, we need to run our kids to practices, we need to go grocery shopping. I mean, it's not that we're doing inherently sinful things, most of us. It's things that are just the rhythms of life, but that rhythm has to be anchored in something more. And when I learned that was, it's probably about, 12 years ago or 15, I don't remember how long it was now, maybe 15 years ago, I really started diving into the spiritual life and learning about the different vices. When I first heard that sloth also manifests in this overworking, I was really struck by that. And I was like, wow, that doesn't, like you said, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. You wouldn't think that the person who's busting his butt, at the office would be slothful, but it is, because it's this misalignment of a value set. Also, when it comes to Acedia, I've heard that it's referred to as the noonday demon.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about this in the book, and I think where I read where that term comes from is going back to the monks, the Egyptian monks. We're talking about 4th, 5th century, or the early men who kind of left the cities after Christianity became the norm, leaving the rustle and bustle of the cities and wanted to go out into the deserts to explore and to be with the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the great early writers, this gentleman by the name of Evagrius Ponticus, it starts introducing a lot of these ideas. And I don't know if it was him or John Cashin, who first introduced the term Acedia specifically, or referring to it as the noonday demon. But the term comes from this place of, well, if the monk gets up and he's being diligent, he's feeling good about his start of the day. It's 6 a.m. He's up, he's praying, he's offering his fast, he's staying in his cell, he's doing what he's supposed to do. And then noon kind of comes around and your mind starts wandering. And it's like, hey, I wonder what so-and-so's doing in his cell. I wonder what else is going on out there in that big old world, And it's that moment where you start getting a little bit kind of lax in your practice. And not lax in the sense of being scrupulous, but just the temptation for distraction really starts to emerge. And that listlessness, that busyness, that hurriedness, well, I can just kind of do all these other little things and I start getting kind of busy for the sake of it. That's where that term starts coming from. But then you say also in the book, and I don't know where you got this from, it's beautiful, but you also say it's referred to as a noonday demon because it doesn't cast a shadow. That it's so hard to see. It's hard to pinpoint within us when we are actually succumbing to this temptation of falling into slothfulness.
Yeah. It's a really tricky one. Yeah, I love those passages from Evagrius and from Cashin, partly because it's one of those places where, and again, I was coming across these first as an undergraduate, but reading those, I was like, this sounds a lot like me. Like, especially that feeling of, because at the time, and I think, probably a lot of people around that age of, 21, 22, I had a lot of ardor for the faith, and I was engaged in a lot of, fairly strenuous spiritual practices at the time, largely because I could, didn't have a family or other obligations. And so I could do all these things like, get up early for mass and, spend a bunch of hours in the adoration chapel and, things I could do now if I let myself be more open to grace, but things that I did at the time. And still, there would come that time during the day when, I start to get tired, I start to get hungry. And suddenly, I don't really want to work on this epistemology paper anymore. I'd rather kind of wander over to so-and-so's apartment and see, hey, what is he up to? I'd rather kind of imagine, okay, what would be the perfect conditions under which I could be a really great student or scholar or saint or any of these things. And I mean, if that is not one of the biggest problems that we're dealing with as a church today and as a church through all time, this feeling of, man, if only all the conditions were right? If we had the liturgy just right, if we had our school system just right, if we had all these things just right, think about how great we would all be. And it makes it so easy to reject the good that is in front of us. It makes it so easy to reject the work that, okay, well, that sounds great, but what does God want me to do right now, right here? And it's, I find myself doing that all the time. One of the things that kind of came up as I was reading for the book was there are a number of authors who talk about acedia as the besetting sin of the modern age, which that in connection with Aquinas's comment on acedia as being a sin against Sabbath observance was really what got me thinking about a lot of these things as far as, okay, what if that's the case? So it's pretty clear that Sabbath observance has gone out the window in our day. Sure, obviously, statistics on mass attendance, are very well known. Huge decline, right, in recent decades. But beyond that too, right, and Robert Louis Wilkin talks about this in his essay "Church as Culture" from 2004. Um, Everything looks the same on Sunday as it does on other days, except for our friends Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby, right? But everybody else is kind of living Sunday like any other day. So if that's the case, if the Sabbath has kind of vanished, if acedia is a sin against the Sabbath, and if acedia is the besetting sin of the modern age, as people like Evelyn Waugh suggest, well, why is that? What is it about today that has really given acedia a chance to strike? And I think there are a lot of things that have contributed to that. One of the biggest ones, I think, is technology. I mean, obviously, we've talked about this before in our previous interview. Technology has a lot of great components to it. I'm very glad you and I can have this conversation. But, I also have this, iPhone right over here, which is, I think, very often a huge weapon that acedia has on its side. Because I've not had anything in my life that has made it so easy to distract myself from whatever God really wants me to do in each moment than that smartphone. It's so easy to, instead of taking free moments between changing diapers and fixing meals and grading papers, instead of taking all that time to pray or to read or to exercise or do anything else productive, it's so much easier just to, pull up my phone, check my texts, check Facebook, email, all these sorts of things, accomplish absolutely nothing other than just getting away from whatever I really ought to do in the moment. So it's and yeah, that I think that image of the shadowless demon just kind of occurred to me at one point. Just think about if that sun is straight overhead, right, then things aren't really throwing any shadows. But yeah, it makes it so difficult to see when is that noonday devil operating on me, especially because it can be so close to feelings, kind of like authentic feelings of spiritual aridity that are meant to kind of prompt us onward, and it can be so difficult to discern between, is this an authentic spiritual movement where, God wants me to help, establish this new school or come up with this new way of doing things that could potentially produce greater results for the community? Or is this just another distraction and I'm meant to just do the work that's obviously before me right now?
I mean, that is the $1 million question, is it not? I mean, you even spoke about yourself and your own experience. I mean, you're working full time, you have a family, you're welcoming a new child, you're writing a book on rest. I mean, it had to, it's funny, right? I mean, but you did it because you felt like there was a prompting. And so it's not that there aren't going to be times of hardship, or that there aren't going to be times where we have to really press forward. I don't know if you've seen the Cabrini movie yet.
Not yet.
But it's beautiful. It's really, and I'm very critical of Christian films. I think we talked about this in our last conversation also, that it tends to be, could be a little bit shallow or propagandish, I would say, at times as well. And but this was just a beautiful story of Mother Cabrini and her journey, starting orphanages and hospitals. And the reason I bring it up in this context, because I guess among the more conservative circles, I've heard this critique that, well, the movie didn't do enough to teach her, to show her prayer life, I'm like, okay, well, fair enough, but you see this woman as like driven. I mean, she wakes up in the middle of the night and she's out there digging wells. I mean, she's just, obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, in terms of serving the Italian immigrants in New York. And just, she faces everyone and presses against it and pushes against it and keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And I think there's a line in the movie where the Archbishop of New York says, Mother, I can't tell the difference between your ambition and your faith. Like I don't know where the line is anymore in terms of what's really happening here. But she's the first American saint. I mean, so there's something to this notion of we sometimes do have to press forward into the dark. We are invited into the unknown. Some of us are called to keep pushing even when we don't see necessarily the results kind of emerging. In the discernment between when should I give up versus when should I keep going is a really tricky one to understand. And so then, is my aridity that I'm feeling in prayer something that the Lord has allowed for me to experience, because this aridity is forcing me to do a self-assessment within my own heart, to be able to pay attention and to say, there's something within me that needs a little bit more fine-tuning, which is what those moments of aridity are supposed to be, for us to be called into a deeper sense? Or is it just that I'm falling into a distractibility and I'm just, yeah, that's it, distracting myself and falling into a hedonistic treadmill of just being on the phone, searching for the next little thing? And what I tell people is that becomes a question of discernment, where you have to really pay attention to that within your own heart. And I can feel it within myself at times. I mean, so my Lent, I gave up the news and I gave up YouTube, because I identified very quickly that those were the greatest sources of distraction for me. And so on my phone, I deleted every news app. I blocked every news website off of Safari. I blocked YouTube on Safari. I mean, I just tried my hardest to let go of those things. And did I have moments where I cheated? Yes. Okay. I'm going to make a public confession. It wasn't a perfect Lent. Okay. But what I have learned is that I can see a little bit more clearly in that fast of giving these things up, how there's a pull that happens within me. And when I can identify that pull towards distraction, or that pull towards, I'm just on this app for no other reason than to just be on it. I have no intentionality as to why I'm on this app. I'm only on it because I just kind of did a pattern within, that we have within our phones. We check this one, do this one, do this one, do this one. And it's kind of neurologically circuited within my brain that I'm just going because I'm supposed to be, that's what I'm going to do. What I've been able to identify a little bit more clearly within my own experiences is that's not good. That's the acedia. But then I've had moments in my life where I'm busting my butt, working really hard on a project, like doing my dissertation, or doing the podcast or other ventures, where I don't think that I'm just distracting myself, because I'm pouring myself into a venture that I think is going to be a blessing for my family and for my community and for those who the Lord has called me to serve. So the discernment there is rather tricky for us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. Mario Sacasa taking a quick break from my conversation with Danny here. Just want to encourage you to check us out at faithandmarriage.org. Let's say you're listening to this episode and you're wondering, man, I would love to be able to take Sunday just to reclaim a sense of rest within my week and to be able to orient my life again, to have some structure and understanding of what worship is. But let's say life is just too busy and you don't know how to be able to do that right out of the gates. Well, then my strongest encouragement to you is to go on a retreat. And we have a number of married couples retreats available for you on our website. If you head to faithandmarriage.org, all of our retreats are held in Covington, Louisiana at the St. Joseph Abbey Retreat Center. It's a beautiful setting. It is a retreat center tailor-made for married couples. And so you don't have to worry about the inconvenience of sleeping on two twin beds, or who's going to decide to sleep on the floor, or any of those uncomfortable conversations that can tend to happen when you do a married couples retreat at a venue that is not tailored for married couples. Well, that is not a problem at our retreat center. And so we want to encourage you to check us out at faithandmarriage.org. If you and your spouse are in need of a retreat, of wanting to kickstart again a sense of worship and Sabbath within your life, and being able to bring about rest, and want to be able to dive into conversations and to grow in relationship with one another and with the Lord, then check us out at one of our upcoming Faith and Marriage retreats. So again, faithandmarriage.org.
Yeah, we talked about this some last time as well. The question of Abraham. How do you know if
always
when you hear that call, right, to go to a distant land, do you follow that or not? But I think what all of this is getting toward is that, again, what's the answer, right? And of course, it's the Lord.
Yes.
So it begins with, putting first things first, right? So make Sunday the first day, make the liturgy, make the Mass the beginning of all things and the end of all things for you.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other things that flow from that too, right? So that Sunday is it's not just kind of taking a break from, all right, well, let me get back to real life now. But no, like that is real life, right?
Yeah.
That the Mass is, this is the beginning of the end for me, right? Here, every Sunday and every time I participate in the liturgy, I'm experiencing something of what God is calling me toward eternally. And so then, from there, it affects how I order my family, it affects how I order my prayer life, it affects the way that I seek to have moments of silence within the day, rather than just sort of the constant noise that is really hard to let go of.
Mm-hmm.
I find for me one of the big challenges right now is just, part of it is that which from family life, that it can just be very loud, and that's joyful and wonderful. But I've noticed with myself lately that I really have to make an effort to sit in silence sometimes. It's hard for me to let go of noise now, because I've gotten so used to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it takes me an effort to let go of all the noises, let go of the music, let go of the podcasts, let go of all these good things,
Mm-hmm.
but which can also distract me from listening to the voice of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Even in Mass too, it's I've found because I'm spending a lot of time often especially during Sunday Mass, redirecting this child and holding this child and putting this child's shoe back on. I've really had to, find myself making a new effort to say, well, let me. This might be hard, but let me actually try to pay more attention to the readings.
Mm-hmm.
Let me actually listen closely to the homily, even if it's difficult. And doing all of those things, I think, kind of maintaining that attention to the Lord that begins in the Mass, is where that work of discernment really, really happens, where I train myself to hear the Lord's voice in all those difficult moments of trying to navigate an ordinary day and say, what does God really want me to do right now?
Yeah.
This is, so related to all of this is, so not long after UD, when I finished my undergraduate studies, came back to New Orleans, was teaching at Jesuit for the first time. I reread Augustine's Confessions, which I had read for the first time as a freshman. And it was a work that I really loved, but a work that, I guess not surprisingly, I found difficult
Mm-hmm.
for any number of reasons. One of them being the way that Augustine really shows us how much his mind has been formed by Scripture. And so I love it now, but at the time I found it very difficult to sort of navigate. Okay, like how many Scripture quotations did he just weave together into this one sentence? But one of the things that really struck me on that rereading when I moved back to New Orleans was his discussion of time, where he talks about time as a distension of the mind, right? This,
Mm-hmm.
Memory drawing me back into the past, anticipation drawing me into the future, and how I really have this experience of finding it very difficult to rest in the present. And he identifies this as the cause of a lot of our sinfulness, namely this anxiety that emerges out of memory and anticipation. And to me, this is so critical for understanding Sunday, because, again, this is one of those passages where I felt myself kind of on display on the page there as I was reading. Because, how many times do I, instead of attending to the work that God has set out before me, attending to God in the moment, how often am I worried about, and I didn't like how that conversation with a colleague went last Tuesday, or I'm stressed out about this expense I have coming up, next week. But all these things kind of draw me out of the present. And Augustine, of course, doesn't mean it in like a, you only live once
YOLO.
type feel. Yeah, just live in the moment, be in the now.
Let's go, man.
Yeah, except in the fundamental sense of if we go through our whole lives spending hardly any time present to God, how can we expect to enjoy heaven, where we will do nothing but be present to God? I think John Henry Newman puts it like, if we find ourselves bored in Mass, right, this place where we're supposed to like resituate ourselves in God's presence, we're going to be pretty bored in heaven as well. And I think, of course, there's a lot there about the difference between where we are actually and where we want to be aspirationally. Because I think I think even those of us who are, I think even many of the best folks out there probably have moments where they're not completely on fire during Mass or other times.
I'm sure there are even times when the priest's mind is wandering as he's saying the words of consecration.
It is possible.
This is a possibility, And so again, not trying to encourage scrupulosity,
right,
but encouraging this notion of what is the most present. And if we can identify that on Sunday, then what we've been saying this whole time is then we can then identify that throughout the week. Right. That can help us. And so a quote here from the book, you say, "When sloth takes hold of us, our victory is not found in flights and rushing off to do 100 distracting tasks, but in performing the work which is set before us." It just captures, what you've been saying. But if we don't, and this is the argument, is that if we don't know what that main thing is, because we're just running around as a society with chickens with their heads cut off, then we have a hard time genuinely making appropriate discernment. And then that's how we can fall into all these other sinful traps, that are all there for us. There's something really therapeutic about what you're saying. So I'm a therapist, obviously, so my brain always kind of goes back into that type of language and experience. And something I found with a lot of my clients who struggle with anxiety is helping them to see that anxiety is a signal that you're not feeling safe in this moment. There's something about your environment that is not making you feel safe. And the reason that you've come to that conclusion is because of your experience that has alerted you to certain previous experiences that are alerting you to in this moment to say something about this is not making me feel safe. And so your nervous system is acting up. And there's ways of being able to process this. And a lot of therapists want to go back into the past and focus on memories and focus on previous experiences and hurts and all. And we go there a little bit, but what I found to be much more effective is to say, rather than just kind of digging, getting lost in your memory, which can happen, because that's just getting lost in your imagination, getting lost in something that happened in the past. Rather, how do we attend to this now, in the here and now, and then move forward from it? And I think, I don't know, there's something in connection here, there's something in terms of what you said with Augustine that made me think about that so much of our time is spent ruminating on issues of the past or worrying about things that are going to happen in the future. So some of the work that we have to kind of do is learning how to regulate our this is me being a therapist here, regulate our nervous systems to the point that we can interact with the things as they are. And so I tell people this all the time, like what you're going through right now, whatever hardship you're experiencing at work, at school, and family or whatever, like let's just let that be enough, okay? Without it having to dredge up whatever shame narratives or whatever negative narratives you have about yourself. Like let's kind of set those things aside and let's actually deal with what is before you right now. And if we can deal with this, and we can bring healing to whatever the experience is happening now. And we can develop the certain virtues that need to be developed. Courage, for example, diligence, for example, more assertiveness often is the case with people who struggle with anxiety, learning how to speak up for yourself. Then when you do those things and you engage and exercise those virtues in the here and now, then what ends up happening is that becomes the counter to those old narratives that are back there. Yeah.
That's really beautiful. there's so there's a part in Dante's Divine Comedy. So Dante has he's just left the summit of the mountain of purgatory, and he's ascended into heaven. And at the summit of purgatory, which in Dante's kind of imaginative conception of it is basically the Garden of Eden on top of this mountain. And before he ascends into heaven, he drinks from these two rivers, the Leth and the Unoe. And so as he's ascending with Beatrice, they're just, they're conversing as Dante does throughout the comedy. And Beatrice brings up something that Dante did. And he says, "When did I do that? I don't remember that." And she says, "Well, yeah, obviously you don't remember it because you've just drunk from the Leth and the Unoe, which one, erases all memory of sin, and then two, strengthens all memory of good." The idea being in Dante's conception, right, that, when we enter into heaven, right, in attaining to that eternal vision of God, right, we're cleansed of all memory of evil, and strengthened in all memory of good, right? So our memory is restored, right? Our memory is made kind of the repository of goodness in our lives, which it is meant to do, which obviously we can't quite do that in this life. But I think what you're describing is a way of, in each moment where we allow, we kind of participate in God's healing action in each moment. We kind of slowly allow our interior landscape to be transformed, which is such a key part of the liturgy, and such a key part of overcoming acedia, which I think wants us, with the rest of the devil's ministers, wants us to be kind of always aware of, well, remember that time when you screwed up, or this bad thing happened to you, and here it is again. And that's such a burden, and so contrary to ultimately what God wants for us.
Yes. It's as you shared about Dante in that story is really beautiful, and saying that it's difficult for us to kind of get there. What came to my mind as you were sharing that was Walter Chiswick's story in He Leadeth Me, Father Walter Chiswick, and how a man who was able to spend 5 years in solitary confinement and 20 years in hard service in the gulags was able to find serenity and peace throughout that whole process. And not that it wasn't hard for him, but that he came out, not even just came out on the other side, but early on, he was able to really kind of crack the code, as we would say, as to what peace and tranquility actually means. And so it's not that we forget, because obviously Christ, the resurrected Christ, comes back with the wounds. And so right. there's a lingering memory, we could say, but it's that, tell me if I'm saying this right. It's that memory has been transformed to such a degree that whatever pain was there, whatever evil was experienced, that no longer becomes the focal of it. That what becomes the focal of the memory is the good that God did through it.
Yeah.
That's healing.
Yeah.
And that's the journey of life for all of us, is to have to contend with the experiences that we're going through. And so you say this beautifully. There's another quote for the book. You say, "Life is not a matter of seizing the moment, but lifting every moment to eternity." Beautiful, very sacramental. That's very incarnational. That is the Christian message, that Christ came to this experience, to this existence, to elevate every single moment. And so we have that capacity through our baptism, and to our peril, we lose sight of all of these moments. Even in the midst of hardship, even in the midst of difficulty, even when things seemingly are falling apart, God is present with us. God is there. And what the journey is going to, as it's unfolding, as you're saying, what's going to happen is that we're going to no longer remember the pain or the hardship or the evil that we experienced, the privation that we experienced through that, but rather be able to solely see how God was present throughout it all.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. You've put it so well. There's that moment at the end of Flannery O'Connor's story, "A Good Man Is Hard to Find,"
Mm-hmm.
when so the misfit, this murderer, is crouched on the ground before the grandmother, and he's wearing the shirt of her son, who's just been murdered, along with the rest of her family. And this man is sitting there on the ground, anguished over his inability to know whether what Jesus said was true or not. And he's sitting there, it's not fair. If only I had been there, right? Then I could know. Because if he was who he said he was, then there's no question. You just follow him. It would be the easiest thing in the world. But if he's not, then there's no pleasure but meanness, right? You just burn stuff down and kill people and do whatever you can to seize a little bit of pleasure. And so he's sitting there really like suffering with this question that has plagued him throughout his life, right? Was Jesus who he said he was? And I hate the fact that I can't know. And so the grandmother, who throughout the story we've been a little bit annoyed by, she's brought about this whole catastrophe, basically single-handedly. Suddenly, in that moment of the misfit's anguish, right, looks down at him and says, "Why, you're one of my babies," right, and has this moment of compassion for him, and reaches out her hand and touches him. And of course, it's then that he leaps back like one who's been bitten by a snake, right, and shoots her. And to me, that's such a Marian moment. It's such a moment of seeing this sinful creature, right? Seeing any of us who's clothed in what looks like Christ, who's clothed in this fleshly dress that looks like Christ. And I think all of us experience that anguish that the misfit feels of any moment when I sin, I'm basically saying, I don't really believe that Jesus was who he said he was. Right? And maybe that's putting it a little bit dramatically. There's probably degrees of belief or unbelief in that respect. But but the grandmother, I think, is really Marian, right, in the sense of seeing all of us in our anguish over our struggles to believe, and reaching out a hand to us. And yeah, I think few of us probably have those moments in so dramatic a fashion as O'Connor often paints them for us. But all of us, I think, have those moments of grace, those moments where God kind of breaks through the terror, the anxiety, the difficulty of the situations we do run into, and allows us to participate in his way of dealing with things, of ordering things, which is, of course, what the Lord's Day is kind of all about, right? It's that bringing to completion of the work of creation and ordering and renewing that he starts in Genesis.
It's all about relationship.
Yes.
And like the misfit, if we don't have any context, we can ask these questions, but we've never engaged in a real relationship with the Lord, then that movement of compassion, it becomes like you said, you recoil like one bitten by a snake. Love cannot be received in that deep nihilism or in that deep cynicism, which is that is the peril of our age, and that's the greatest concern, is that in this era of a new evangelization, or rather we're past that, we're really in an era of re-evangelization of our culture, where children just don't even know, people don't even know who Jesus is, don't even know the term anymore, where we're reintroducing these Christian principles to help people to be able to see and to re-experience love at its fullest, at its best, at its highest. So that even if we are struggling with those questions, like the misfit does, when God announces his presence, when God presents himself, we can see it, we can experience it. And that's the Job story. I mean, what what happens at the end of the Job story as he is going through all his defense with his friends, God shows up at the end, and that's part of the story. I mean, it's that God finally shows up, and it doesn't give a full explanation as to why everything happened, but just the fact that he's present was enough for Job, like to reestablish that relationship, and that everything he had said and all his concerns and all his anguish, and Job's really honest. I mean, there's sections in the Job, where his own words, you're like, if this wasn't in the Bible, this might be blasphemous, like that's,
Right.
But it gives comfort in the sense that like, oh, okay, I know that feeling. I've been there, I know I have those words. And even Christ himself saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, there are those moments that are present, but when God manifests himself, how do we see him? Mm-hmm. And that's the danger. And that's why I love that the book is just putting its finger right on what matters most. Yes, we have to talk about lust. Yes, we have to talk about technology. Yes, we have to talk about egoism. Yes, we have to talk about all these other sins that are present. But we have to reclaim the Lord's Day, as the book's title is. We have to understand that when we mess up this hierarchy, that it is to our peril. It is to our peril. And I think that, it's pretty obvious that we are paying the price. And we can see that this generation of young people, I know you work with teenagers right now at Jesuit High School, despite having the most resources and the most affluence of any generation that has come before them, are the poorest in mental health standards. They're the highest rates of depression, highest rates of anxiety, highest rates of suicidal ideation. Why? Like why? Like why? We think that we finally got all the material things available to us, but somehow it isn't enough. Somehow it isn't enough. And that experiment is being played out right now in vivo with our kids, and we're paying the price for it.
Yeah. It's so the book comes a lot out of reflection on the book of Exodus. So I spent a lot of time with the book, just kind of, which I found this to be a really fruitful experience. It was kind of the first time I'd gone through scripture, really looking at one or two ideas. So kind of just looking for, okay, where does Sabbath, where does Lord's Day show up throughout scripture? Where do things about work show up throughout scripture? And I was really struck by so many things in Exodus, right? Even to the fact that, of course we all know the famous, lines from Moses, "Let my people go," right?
Give me your best Charlton Heston.
Yeah,
voice.
right.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm up to that.
Let my people go.
Yes. So I was really struck coming back to Exodus and seeing that, in fact, the first thing that Moses asks is not for the people to be set free entirely, but for them to be set free in the really meaningful sense, which is to be free to worship, right? Let the people worship their God, which of course is what all the rest of Exodus and all the rest of Scripture is about, is moving the people toward authentic worship, right? Going out into the desert, going through this period of cleansing, so that, right, we can be a people who worship God as he ought to be worshipped. And it's so easy to kind of be on the side of Pharaoh in the way that we treat ourselves, and to say, well, yeah, I mean, if you want to worship, that just means you don't have enough work, right? So you better get busier. And I'm not going to give you the materials to do it, right? I'm not going to let myself be restored through encounter with the Lord. But I'm just going to pile more and more upon myself and demand more and more upon myself, and really plague myself with all sorts of things as a result of not letting myself encounter the Lord as he offers himself to me. I'll get to the mountain, and I'll not want to wait for God's word to come down to me, right? And I'll say, yeah, that Moses guy, we don't know what happened to him. Uh, give me some other God, right? Give me my iPhone that I can really devote my time to. Give me all these things. I mean, that was one thing that really struck me is, and of course, again, there's tons of variance on the data, but it seems like a safe number for how much time people spend on smartphones a day is something like 3.5 hours, which over the course of a week is basically 24 hours.
Yeah.
So we basically have a smartphone Sabbath that we've dedicated from each week. Yeah, and as you say, it's causing so much suffering by turning our attention away from what matters. It's really really sobering the way you put it, that our children are the ones who are basically the objects of this experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can you say just a little bit more? I know we're kind of coming to the end of our time here, but just a little bit more about that notion that the Israelites Moses wasn't just commanding Pharaoh to let his people go, but to let his people go so that they are free to worship. Why is that image so significant?
Sure. So I think maybe just to put it in the context of Genesis to begin with, so the structure of the Genesis creation narrative makes it pretty clear that in some sense what God is doing is constructing a temple, right? That in building the universe, he's building a place where he and the universe can be in right relationship to each other through worship. And so when God remembers his people, he wants them to be in relationship with him. So he wants them to be a people set apart, a people who are not just released in order to go about their own business, but a people who can re-enter into the fullness of relationship that he desires for man from the beginning. That kind of comfortable harmony that exists between God and Adam before the fall. And so by bringing the people out and giving them, basically meeting them at Sinai, he's showing them, here I am, right? You are my dear people, my beloved children who have suffered for so long in exile. Come back to me. Let us meet each other. And all the instructions that he gives for how to worship him give us this kind of blueprint for encountering him again, encountering him anew, and walking with him through the desert, being guided by him, being nurtured by him the way that a mother hen nurtures her chicks, gathers them to herself beneath her wings. It's just such a lovely and tender encounter that God is drawing his people into and drawing us into in turn. And that, of course, is that the moment of worship is the moment when we kind of are restored to being like God, the way that we participate with him in sharing in creation and lifting creation back up to him, which of course is what we do in the greatest way in Mass, and then in all the activity that flows from that.
Yeah. I'm struck with that narrative that, Egypt initially is the place of salvation. It's the fact that Joseph, happens to rises the ranks and becomes, second to Pharaoh, that because of his position, he's able to then do what he does in terms of storing the grain to preserve and prepare for the 7 years of famine, that when the famine strikes, Israel, his dad and his brothers emerge out of nowhere and does the test on them. But, eventually, he welcomes them into Egypt. And so Egypt initially becomes is the place of salvation. It initially is that. And then we read, of course, in the very beginning of Exodus that, hundreds of years, whatever it is that passes, that the people have forgotten, and that Pharaoh now sees this as an opportunity to turn these different people that live in his city and live in his country into slaves. And I don't know what that means, but that's just always, I find that curious, that I guess it just goes back to, as we've been saying, this notion of discernment and movement, and how God, again, if we can trust with every step along the way, and if we can see and we can understand that he's gonna pivot, he's gonna move, he's creating, he's redeeming, he's working with us. And so just want to encourage everybody, wherever they're at right now, hey, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. And wherever you're at in your faith life, let's get back on track. And the clearest way of being able to do that, as you've articulated so beautifully, is what can we do to approach Sunday Mass, to approach the liturgy with a little bit more reverence, a little bit more preparation, a little bit more attention. Even if we got to take care of the kids and we got to do all that, okay, fine, do the best that we can. God knows our circumstances. But just being able to see Sunday as not just a pass go, but rather the pinnacle event of our week. Mm-hmm. And if we can reclaim that and we can bake that into our existence, then everything else will start falling into place.
Yes.
Then we can start doing all the other things that we need to do. And then in some way we're beginning to carve into or enter into the beautiful harmony that is waiting for us in heaven.
Yes.
The beautiful harmony that will be waiting ultimately in the final resurrection and the new creation, when there is that harmony that exists between all the movement of the cosmos and people and heaven and God. I mean, it's just too much to imagine. So.
Yeah, and it's a harmony that Jesus lives out for us so clearly in the Gospels. That's one thing I love so much about so many of the Sabbath narratives in the Gospels. Is that Jesus is very busy. He's, I don't know of anyone who's as busy as Jesus is in the gospel narratives. And of course, he's again and again questioned about, why are you healing people on the Sabbath? What are you doing? And he has that wonderful line that I think is really can be programmatic for all of us. From the beginning until now, my Father is at work, and I'm at work with him.
Yeah, I love that line.
And that to me is so. I try to kind of make that just sort of a passage that's kind of always in my mind, right? As yes, like life is very busy. Am I approaching it with the Spirit of the Lord, who's aware of what he is doing, as the work of the Father? And in that way, I think all of those things, right? The taking care of the kids, the taking care of the job, all of that comes into that harmony that you speak of when we see it as a continuation of the work of Christ, right? Of healing, of ordering, of making things new.
Well, Danny, as we're coming to a close, I really just want to thank you again for this conversation and for the book. I can say personally in my life, I'm in a season of kind of weariness right now. I'm working on some new projects that I need to work on to be able to kind of move things forward, and so it's demanding a lot of time and attention right now. And so it's good that, again, just in God's providence, we would have this conversation in the midst of sleepless nights, waking up with anxiety, all the stuff that we do. I'm human also, people, okay? And we got things that kind of weigh on us. And so just to be able to have this moment of rest and to be reminded that, like, we're going to do this together with the Lord. And if this is genuine what the Lord's put before us, then let's keep going. Any final thoughts? Anything else you'd like to share as we're kind of wrapping up?
I think, first of all, just my thanks to you for another delightful conversation. And as you say, a moment of rest and restoration for me. And I think also just a word of encouragement to anybody listening, that if they are, as I so often am, feeling weary, feeling listless, feeling kind of overwhelmed by how apparently impossible the conditions of modern living are in so many ways. Just to recall that from the beginning until now, the Father is at work and Christ is at work too.
Amen. Amen. Well, that is how we will end. So we have links to the book for people to be able to access it. If they'd enjoyed the conversation, how else can they get a hold of you? Anything else you'd recommend?
Yeah, so they can, of course, I always like a good email, which people can reach out to me at editor.jdv@gmail.com. I suppose, we're recording this Holy Thursday. I suppose after Easter, I'll be back on Instagram at fitz.the.writer. So, of course, I welcome any contact there as well.
Fantastic. Well, like I said, we'll have links to all of that. So, Danny, thanks so much for joining me again on the show.
Thank you, Mario. It's been a great delight.
All right, everybody. Well, that does it for my conversation with Danny Fitzpatrick. And I just want to thank Danny again for coming on the show and for all of you for hanging in there all the way to the end. And just encourage all of us. I recognize that life is absolutely busy and distractions abound. And we have to do our work to be able to pull away from these devices. And I know I'm saying that right now, and you're probably listening to this show on your phone as you're doing 1,000 different things. And so who am I? I'm a hypocrite also. But I hope that this episode has encouraged you to be able to put the darn thing down a little bit, to spend a little bit more time with your family and with the people that are in front of you, of being able to genuinely ask questions about what it means to have real leisure within your life, and what does it mean to really worship the Lord, and how do we approach Sundays with a sense of reverence and not just with a sense of hurriedness or melancholy or regret. And so we want to encourage everybody to reclaim the Lord's Day, to reclaim a sense of worship within your life. And that if we can understand that, then everything else will fall into place. So many blessings to you wherever you are today, however this episode found you. Please know that I am praying for you, that I am asking God to bless you to whatever you may be doing this day, whatever struggles you may be having. Thank you for giving us this time and that we can share together. So many blessings to all of you, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.